Welcome everybody to the winter solstice and last of the year Soteria session, the 56th of the year 2025, when we shall be reading How to Light a Fire by Jack London, introduced by Stead. And over to you, Stead.
Happy solstice, everyone who's watching. In 23 days, on the 12th of January, 150 years will have passed since Jack London was born, not, one might say, unfortunately, in London, but in San Francisco. The extraordinarily short span of his 40 years of life, in which he wrote 50 books in his last 2 decades, was packed with so many adventures that I shall leave them here unspecified and as a subject to be discovered by anyone unaware of them later. Except for one, which is the origin of the story we shall be reading today. It is his adventure in the Klondike Gold Rush of 1897, where 100,000 prospectors went in search of riches to the Yukon Territory of Canada bordering Alaska. It was an inhospitable place.
MVP 2023.
And Jack London, like many others, devotees, had constant pains in his hip and leg muscles, and his face was permanently scarred. But the success he achieved with the literary results of his experience also stayed with him for the rest of his career.
Connected to Michael's MVP 2023.
As a writer, two things stand out for me as characterizing him. His great talent for describing physical life in strong and vivid prose, and his philosophy of life, which one might connect most closely with Herbert Spencer, amongst other evolutionary thinkers. In the setting of the Klondike, that philosophy finds a natural habitation, whereas in other settings, the fit seems to me less comfortable. And it's that congruence of form and content which is one of the reasons why I think this is such a highly regarded short story, often anthologized and several times made into a film. On this day of the winter solstice, when one may more easily think of primal realities, it seems a very appropriate text to turn our minds towards. And if I may, I should like to dedicate this reading to Ben, late of this parish, so to speak, Yulbrooke, maybe 6 or so years ago. With that, let's go to the text, which I think should last about 40 minutes in reading, so it's about the right kind of length. Now, can we all see it? And is the size?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Right. I think
maybe people who are not reading might switch their audio off just in case anybody, interrupts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an idea. Janine, maybe ladies first should be the rule we're following here. So perhaps you'd like to start. If you could unmute. Janine, can you unmute?
That's
it.
If
Good.
I'm reading, I guess you better hear me.
Yeah.
Day had dawned cold and gray when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail. He climbed the high earth bank where a little traveled trail led east through the pine forest. It was a high bank, and he paused to breathe at the top. He excused the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. There was no sun or promise of sun, although there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day. However, there seemed to be an indescribable darkness over the face of things. That was because the sun was absent from the sky. This fact did not worry the man. He was not alarmed by the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun. The man looked along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, north and south, as far as his eye could see. It was unbroken white. The one thing that relieved the whiteness was a thin, dark line that curved from the pine-covered island to the south. It curved into the north, where it disappeared behind another pine-covered island. This dark line was the trail, the main trail. It led south 500 miles to Chilkoot Pass and Saltwater. It led north 75 miles to Dawson, and still farther on to the north, 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on Bering Sea, 1,000 miles and a half, 1,000 more. But all this, the distant trail, no sun in the sky, the great cold, and the strangeness of it all, had no effect on the man. It was not because he was long familiar with it. He was a newcomer to the land, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was not able to imagine. He was quick and ready in the things of life, but only in the things and not in their meanings. 50 degrees below zero meant 80 degrees of frost. Such facts told him that it was cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to consider his weaknesses as a creature affected by temperature, nor did he think about man's general weakness, able to live only within narrow limits of heat and cold. From there, it did not lead him to thoughts of heaven and the meaning of a man's life. 50 degrees below zero meant a bite of frost that hurt, and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear coverings, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero was to him nothing more than 50 degrees below zero. That it should be more important than that was a thought that had never entered his head. As he turned to go, he forced some water from his mouth as an experiment. There was a sudden noise that surprised him. He tried it again and again in the air, for they could fall to the snow. The drops of water became ice that broke with the noise. He knew that at 50 below zero, water from the mouth made a noise when it hit the snow. But this had done that in the air. Undoubtedly, it was colder than 50 below, but exactly how much colder he did not know, but the temperature did not matter. He was headed for the old camp on Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come across the mountain from the Indian Creek country. He had taken the long trail to look at the possibility of floating logs, the islands of the Yukon down the river when the ice melted. He could be at camp by 6 o'clock that evening. It would be a little after dark, but the boys would be there, a fire would be burning, and a hot supper would be ready. As he thought of lunch, he pressed his hands against the package under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped in a handkerchief and lying for warmth against the naked skin. Otherwise, the bread would freeze. He smiled contentedly to himself as he thought of those pieces of bread, each of which enclosed a generous portion of cooked meat. He plunged among the big pine trees. The trail was not well marked here. Several inches of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed. He was glad he was without a sled. Actually, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he decided, as he rubbed his nose and face with his mittened hand. He had a good growth of hair on his face, but that did not protect his nose or the upper part of his face from the frosty air. Following the man's heels was a big native dog. It was a wolf dog, gray-coated and not noticeably different from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was worried by the great cold. It knew that this was no time for traveling. Its own feeling was closer to the truth than the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, then 70 below. It was 75 below zero. because the freezing point is 32 above zero. It meant that there were 100 degrees of frost. Dear.
Oh, Carl, would you like to take over if you're still there?
Sure. Following at the man's heels was a big native dog.
No, we're the dog didn't know anything about temperatures.
Oh, sorry.
No.
They got the. Let's go. All right, right. The dog did not know anything about temperatures. Possibly in its brain, possibly in its brain there was no understanding of a condition of very cold, such as was in the man's brain. But the animal sensed the danger. Its fear made it question eagerly every movement of the man as as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned about fire, and it wanted fire. Otherwise, it would dig itself into the snow and find shelter from the cold air. The frozen moistness of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost. The hair on the man's face was similarly frosted, but more solidly. It took the form of ice and increased with every warm, moist breath from his mouth. Also, the man had tobacco in his mouth. The ice held his lips so tightly together that he could not empty the juice from his mouth. The result was a long piece of yellow ice hanging from his lips. If he fell down, it would break, like glass, into many pieces. He expected the ice formed by the tobacco juice, having been out twice before when it was very cold, but it had not been as cold as this, he knew. He continued through the level path, he continued through the level forest for several miles. Then he went down a bank to the frozen path of a small stream. This was Henderson Creek, and he knew he was 10 miles from where the stream divided. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was traveling at the rate of 4 miles an hour. Thus he figured that he would arrive where the stream divided at 12:30. He decided he would eat his lunch when he arrived there. The dog followed again at his heels, with its tail hanging low, as the man started to walk along the frozen stream. The old sled trail could be seen, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last sleds. In a month, no man had traveled up or down that silent creek. The man went steadily ahead. He was not much of a thinker. At that moment, he had nothing to think about except that he would eat lunch at the stream's divide, and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and had there been, speech would not have been possible because of the ice around his mouth. Once in a while, the thought repeated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his face and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this without thinking, frequently changing hands. But with all his rubbing, the instant he stopped, his face and nose became numb. His face would surely be frozen. He knew that and was sorry that he had not worn the sort of nose guard Bud wore when it was cold. Such a guard passed across the nose and covered the entire face. But it did not matter much, he decided. What was a little frost? A bit painful, that was all. It was never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was most observant. He noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and the bends, and always he noted where he placed his feet. Once coming around a bend, he moved suddenly to the side, like a frightened horse. He curved away from the place where he had been walking and retraced his steps several feet from along the trail. He knew the creek was frozen to the bottom. No creek could contain water in that winter, but he knew also that there were streams of water that came out from the hillsides and ran along under the snow and on top of the ice of the creek. He knew that even in the coldest weather, these streams were never frozen, and he also knew their danger. They hid pools of water under the snow that might be 3 inches deep or 3 feet. Sometimes a skin of ice half an inch thick covered them, and in turn was covered by the snow. Sometimes there was both water and thin ice, and when a man broke through, he could get very wet. That was why he had jumped away so suddenly. He had felt the ice move under his feet. He had also heard the noise of the snow-covered ice skin breaking. And to get his feet wet in such a temperature meant trouble and danger. At the very least, it meant delay, because he would be forced to stop and build a fire. Only under its protection could he bare his feet while he dried his socks and moccasins. He stood and studied the creek bottom and its banks. He decided that the flowing stream of water came from the right side. He thought a while, rubbing his nose and face. Then he walked to the left. He stepped carefully and tested the ice at each step. Once away from the danger, he continued at his 4-mile pace. During the next 2 hours, he came to several similar dangers. Usually the snow above the pools had sunken. Can you bring it down?
Oh, sorry.
That's right. Had a sunken appearance. However, once again, he came near to falling through the ice. Once sensing danger, he made the dog go ahead. The dog did not want to go. It hesitated until the man pushed it forward. Then it went quickly across the white, unbroken surface. Suddenly it fell through the ice, but climbed out on the other side, which was firm. It had wet its feet and legs. Almost immediately the water on them turned to ice. The dog made quick efforts to get the ice off its legs. Then it lay in the snow and began to bite out the ice that had formed between the toes. The animal knew enough to do this. To permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this. It merely obeyed the commands that arose from the deepest part of its being.
Thanks so much, Carl.
Sure.
Michael in London, would you be able to pick it up?
But the man knew these things, having learned them from experience. He removed the mitten from his right hand and helped the dog tear out the pieces of ice. He did not bare his fingers more than a minute, and was surprised to find that they were numb. It certainly was cold. He pulled on the mitten quickly and beat the hand across his breast. At 12 o'clock the day was at its brightest, yet the sun did not appear in the sky. At 12:30 on the minute he arrived at the divide of the creek. He was pleased at his rate of speed. If he continued, he would certainly be with the boys by 6 o'clock that evening. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt and pulled forth his lunch. The action took no more than a quarter of a minute, yet in that brief moment the numbness touched his bare fingers. He did not put the mitten on, but instead stuck the fingers against his leg. Then he sat down on a snow-covered log to eat. The pain that followed the striking of his fingers against his leg ceased so quickly that he was frightened. He had not had time to take a bite of his lunch. He struck the fingers repeatedly and returned them to the mitten. Then he bared the other hand for the purpose of eating. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice around his mouth prevented him. Then he knew what was wrong. He had forgotten to build a fire and warm himself. He laughed at his own foolishness. As he laughed, he noted the numbness of his bare fingers. Also, he noted that the feeling which had first come to his toes when he sat down was already passing away. He wondered whether the toes were warm or whether they were numb. He moved them inside the moccasins and decided they were numb. He pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was somewhat frightened. He stamped forcefully until the feeling returned to his feet. It certainly was cold, was his thought. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in this country. He had laughed at him at the time. That showed one must not be too sure of things. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. He walked a few steps, stamping his feet and waving his arms until reassured by the returning warmth. Then he took some matches and proceeded to make a fire. In the bushes, the high water had left a supply of sticks. From there, he got wood for his fire. Working carefully from a small beginning, he soon had a roaring fire. Bending over the fire, he first melted the ice from his face. With the protection of the fire's warmth, he ate his lunch. For the moment, the cold had been forced away. The dog took comfort in the fire, lying at full length, close enough for warmth and far enough away to escape being burned. When the man had finished eating, he filled his pipe with tobacco and had a comfortable time with the smoke. Then he pulled on his mittens, settled his cap firmly about his ears, and started along the creek trail toward the left. The dog was sorry to leave and looked toward the fire. The man did not know cold. Possibly none of his ancestors had known cold, real cold, but the dog knew, and all of its family knew. And it knew that it was not good to walk outside in such fearful cold. It was the time to lie in a hole in the snow and wait for this awful cold to stop. There was no real bond between the dog and the man. The one was the slave of the other. The dog made no effort to indicate its fears to the man. It was not concerned with the well-being of the man. It was for its own sake that it looked toward the fire. But the man whistled and spoke to it with the sound of the whip in his voice. So the dog started walking close to the man's heels and followed him along the trail. The man put more tobacco in his mouth and started a new growth of yellow ice on his face. Against his moist breath, quickly powdered the hair on his face with white. He looked around him. There did not seem to be so many pools of water under the snow on the left side of Henderson Creek, and for half an hour the man saw no signs of any. And then it happened. At a place where there were no signs, the man broke through. It was not deep. He was wet to the knees before he got out of the water to the firm snow. He was angry and cursed his luck aloud. He had hoped to get into the camp with the boys at 6 o'clock, and this would delay him an hour. Now he would have to build a fire and dry his moccasins and socks. This was most important at that low temperature. He knew that much. So he turned aside to the bank, which he climbed. On top, under several small pine trees, he found some firewood, which had been carried there by the high water of last year. There were some sticks, but also larger branches and some dry grasses. He threw several large branches on top of the snow. This served for a foundation and prevented the young flame from dying in the wet snow. He made a flame by touching a match to a small piece of tree bark that he took from his pocket. This burned even better than paper. Placing it on the foundation, he fed the young flame with pieces of dry grass and with the smallest dry sticks. He worked slowly and carefully, realizing his danger. Gradually, as the flame grew stronger, he increased the size of the sticks with which he fed it. He sat in the snow, pulling the sticks from the bushes under the trees and feeding them directly to the flame. He knew he must not fail. When it is 75 below zero, a man must not fail in his first attempt to build a fire. This is especially true if his feet are wet. If his feet are dry and he fails, he can run along the trail for half a mile to keep his blood moving. But the blood in wet and freezing feet cannot be kept moving by running when it is 75 degrees below. No matter how fast he runs, the wet feet will freeze even harder. All this the man knew. The old man on Sulphur Creek had told him about it, and now he was grateful for the advice. Already all feeling had gone from his feet. To build the fire, he had been forced to remove his mittens, and the fingers had quickly become numb. His pace of 4 miles an hour had kept his heart pushing the blood to all parts of his body, but the instant he stopped, the action of the heart slowed down. He now received the full force of the cold. The blood of his body drew back from it. The blood was alive, like the dog. Like the dog, it wanted to hide and seek cover away from the fearful cold. As long as he walked 4 miles an hour, the blood rose to the surface. But now it sank down into the lowest depths of his body. His feet and hands were the first to feel its absence. His wet feet froze first. His bare fingers were numb, although they had not yet begun to freeze. Nose and face were already freezing, while the skin of all his body became cold as it lost its blood.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Michael in Germany, would you like to take over, please?
But he was safe. Toes and nose and face would be only touched by the frost because the fire was beginning to burn with strength. He was feeding it with sticks the size of his finger. In another minute, he would be able to feed it with larger branches. Then he could remove his wet moccasins and socks. While they dried, he could keep his naked feet warm by the fire, rubbing them first with snow. The fire was a success. He was safe. He remembered the advice of the old man on Sulphur Creek and smiled. The man had been very serious when he said that no man should travel alone in that country after 50 below zero. Well, here he was. He had had the accident, he was alone, and he had saved himself. Those old men were rather womanish, he thought. All the man must do was to keep his head, and he was all right. Any man who was a man could travel alone. But it was surprising the rapidity with which his face and nose were freezing, and he had not thought his fingers could lose their feeling in so short a time. Without feeling, they were because he found it very difficult to make them move together to grasp a stick. They seemed far from his body and from him. When he touched a stick, he had to look to see whether or not he was holding it. All of which mattered little. There was the fire, promising life, with every dancing flame. He started to untie his moccasins. They were coated with ice. The thick socks were like iron, almost to the knees. The moccasin strings were like ropes of steel. For a moment, he pulled them with his unfeeling fingers. Then, realizing the foolishness of it, he grasped his knife. But before he could cut the strings, it happened. It was his own fault, or, instead, his mistake. He should not have built the fire under the pine tree. He should have built it in an open space. But it had been easier to pull the sticks from the bushes and drop them directly on the fire. Now the tree under which he had done this carried a weight of snow on its branches. No wind had been blowing for weeks, and each branch was heavy with snow. Each time he pulled a stick, he shook the tree slightly. There had been just enough movement to cause the awful thing to happen. High up in the tree, one branch dropped its load of snow. This fell on the branches beneath. This process continued, spreading through the whole tree. The snow fell without warning upon the man and the fire was dead. Where it had burned was a pile of fresh snow. The man was shocked. It was like hearing his own judgment of death. For a moment he sat and stared at the spot where the fire had been. Then he grew very calm. Perhaps the old man on Sulphur Creek was right. If he had a companion on the trail, he would be in no danger now. The companion could have built the fire. Now he must build the fire again, and this second time he must not fail. Even if he succeeded, he would be likely to lose some toes. His feet must be badly frozen by now, and there would be some time before the second fire was ready. Such were his thoughts, but he did not sit and think them. He was busy all the time. They were passing through his mind. He made a new foundation for a fire, this time in the open space where no tree would be above it. Next, he gathered dry grasses and tiny sticks. He could not bring his fingers together to pull them out of the ground, but he was able to gather them by the handful. In this way, he also got many pieces that were undesirable, but it was the best he could do. He worked carefully, even collecting an armful of the larger branches to be used later when the fire gathered strength. And all the while the dog sat and watched him. There was an anxious look in its eyes, because it depended upon him as the fire provider, and the fire was slow in coming. When all was ready, the man reached in his pocket for the second piece of tree bark. He knew the bark was there, although he could not feel it with his fingers. He tried again and again, but he could not grasp it. And all the time, in his mind, he knew that each instant his feet were freezing. This thought alarmed him, but he fought against it and kept calm.
Thanks, Michael. I'll read for a bit. He pulled on his mittens with his teeth and began swinging his arms. Then he beat his hands with all his strength against his sides. He did this while he was sitting down. Then he stood up to do it. All the while the dog sat in the snow, its tail curled warmly over its feet and its sharp wolf ears bent forward as it looked at the man. And the man, as he waved his arms and hands, looked with longing at the creature that was warm and secure in the covering provided by nature. After a time, he began to notice some feeling in his beaten fingers. The feeling grew stronger until it became very painful. But the man welcomed the pain. He pulled the mitten from his right hand and grasped the tree bark from his pocket. The bare fingers were quickly numb again. Next, he brought out his pack of matches. But the awful cold had already driven the life out of his fingers. In his effort to separate one match from the others, the whole pack fell in the snow. He tried to pick it out of the snow, but failed. The dead fingers could neither touch nor hold. Now he was very careful. He drove the thought of his freezing feet and nose and face from his mind. He devoted his whole soul to picking up the matches. He followed the movement of his fingers with his eyes, using his sense of sight instead of that of touch. When he saw his fingers on each side of the pack, he closed them. That is, he willed to close them, because the fingers did not obey. He put his mitten on the right hand again and beat it fiercely against his knee. Then, with both mittened hands, he lifted up the pack of matches along with much snow to the front of his jacket. But he had gained nothing. After some struggling, he managed to get the pack between his mittened hands. In this manner, he carried it to his mouth. The ice broke as he opened his mouth with a fierce effort. He used his upper teeth to rub across the pack in order to separate a single match. He succeeded in getting one, which he dropped on his jacket. His condition was no better. He could not pick up the match. Then he thought how he might do it. He picked up the match in his teeth and drew it across his leg. 20 times he did this before he succeeded in lighting it. As it flamed, he held it with his teeth to the tree bark. But the burning smell went up his nose, causing him to cough. The match fell into the snow and the flame died. The old man on Sulphur Creek was right, he thought, in the moment of controlled despair that followed. After 50 below zero, a man should travel with a companion. He beat his hands, but failed to produce any feeling in them. Suddenly, he bared both hands, removing the mittens with his teeth. He caught the whole pack of matches between his arms. His arm muscles were not frozen, and he was able to press the hands tightly against the matches. Then he drew the whole pack along his leg, burst into flames, 70 matches at once. There was no wind to blow them out. He kept his head to one side to escape the burning smell, and held the flaming pack to the tree bark. As he so held it, he noticed some feeling in his hand. His flesh was burning. He could smell it. The feeling developed into pain. He continued to endure it. He held the flame of the matches to the bark that would not light readily because his own burning hands were taking most of the flame. Finally, when he could endure it no more, he pulled his hands apart. The flaming matches fell into the snow, but the tree bark was burning. He began laying dry grasses and the tiniest sticks on the flame. He could not choose carefully because they must be pieces that could be lifted between his hands. Small pieces of green grass stayed on the sticks, and he bit them off as well as he could with his teeth. He treated the flame carefully. It meant life, and it must not cease. The blood had left the surface of his body, and he now began to shake from the cold. A large piece of a wet plant fell on the little fire. He tried to push it out with his fingers. His shaking body made him push it too far, and he scattered the little fire over a wide space. He tried to push the burning grasses and sticks together again. Even with the strong effort that he made, his trembling fingers would not obey, and the sticks were hopelessly scattered. Each stick smoked a little and died. The fire provider had failed. As he looked about him, his eyes noticed the dog sitting across the ruins of the fire from him. It was making uneasy movements, slightly lifting one foot and then the other. Janine, perhaps you could take it up again.
The sight of the dog put a wild idea into his head. He remembered the story of the man caught in a storm who killed an animal and sheltered himself inside the dead body and thus was saved. He would kill the dog and bury his hands in the warm body until feeling returned to them. Then he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, but in his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal. It had never known the man to speak in such a tone before. Something was wrong, and it sensed danger. It knew not what danger, but somewhere in its brain arose a fear of the man. It flattened its ears at the sound of the man's voice. His uneasy movements and the lifting of his feet became more noticeable, but would not come to the man. He got down on his hands and knees and went toward the dog, but this unusual position again excited fear, and the animal moved away. The man sat in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he put on his mittens, using his teeth, and then stood on his feet. He glanced down to assure himself that he was really standing, because lack of feeling in his feet gave him no relation to the earth. His position, however, removed the fear from the dog's mind. When he commanded the dog with his usual voice, the dog obeyed and came to him. As it came within his reach, the man lost control. His arm stretched out to hold the dog, and he experienced real surprise when he discovered that his hands could not grasp. There was neither bend nor feeling in the fingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could escape, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow and in this fashion held the dog while it barked and struggled. But it was all he could do, hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized that he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his frozen hands, he could neither draw nor hold his knife, nor could he grasp the dog around the throat. He freed it, and it dashed wildly away, still barking. It stopped 40 feet away and observed him curiously, with ears sharply bent forward. The man looked down at his hands to locate them and found them hanging at the end of his arms. He thought it curious that it was necessary to use his eyes to discover where his hands were. He began waving his arms, beating his mittened hands against his side. He did this for 5 minutes. His heart produced enough blood to stop his shaking, but no feeling was created in his hands. A certain fear of death came upon him. He realized that it was no longer a mere problem of freezing his fingers and toes or of losing his hands and feet. Now it was a problem of life and death with the circumstances against him. The fear made him lose control of himself, and he turned and ran along the creek bed on the old trail. The dog joined him and followed closely behind. The man ran blindly in fear such as he had never known in his life. Slowly, as he struggled through the snow, he began to see things again: the banks of the creek, the bare trees, and the sky. The running made him feel better. He did not shake anymore. Maybe if he continued to run, his feet would stop freezing. Maybe if he ran far enough, he would find the camp of the boys. Without doubt, he would lose some fingers and toes and some of his face, but the boys would take care of him and save the rest of him when he got there. And at the same time, there was another thought in his mind that said he would never get to the camp and the boys. It told him that it was too many miles away, and the freezing had too great a start, and that he would soon be dead. He pushed this thought to the back of his mind and refused to consider it. Sometimes it came forward and demanded to be heard, but he pushed it away and tried to think of other things. It seemed strange to him that he could run on feet so frozen that he could not feel them when they struck the earth and took the weight of his body. He seemed to be flying along above the surface and to have no connection with the earth. His idea of running until he arrived at the camp of the boys presented one problem. He lacked the endurance. Several times he caught himself as he was falling. Finally, he dropped to the ground, unable to stop his fall. When he tried to rise, he failed. He must sit and rest, he decided. Next time he would merely walk and keep going. As he sat and regained his breath, he knew that he was feeling warm and comfortable. He was not shaking, and it even seemed that a warm glow had come to his body. And yet, when he touched his nose or face, there was no feeling. Running would not bring life to them, nor would it help his hands and feet. Then the thought came to him that the frozen portion of his body must be increasing. He tried to keep this thought out of his mind and forget it. He knew that such thoughts caused a feeling of fright in him, and he was afraid of such feelings. But the thought returned and continued until he could picture his body totally frozen. This was too much, and again he ran wildly along the trail. Once he slowed to a walk, but he thought that the freezing of his body was increasing, made him run again. And all the time the dog ran with him at his heels. When he fell a second time, the dog curled its tail over its feet and sat in front of him, facing him, curiously eager. The warmth and security of the animal angered him. He cursed it until it flattened its ears. This time the shaking because of the cold, began more quickly. He was losing his battle with the frost. It was moving into his body from all sides. This thought drove him forward, but he ran no more than 100 feet when he fell headfirst. It was the last moments of fear. When he had recovered his breath and his control, he sat and thought about meeting death with dignity. However, the idea did not come to him in exactly this manner. His idea was that he had been acting like a fool. He had been running around like a chicken with his head cut off. He was certain to freeze in his present circumstances, and he should accept it calmly. With this newfound peace of mind came the first sleepiness. A good idea, he thought, to sleep his way to death. Freezing was not as bad as people thought. There were many worse ways to die. He pictured the boys finding his body the next day. Suddenly he saw himself with them coming along the trail and looking for himself. And still with them, he came around a turn in the trail and found himself lying in the snow. He did not belong with himself anymore. Even then, he was outside of himself, standing with the boys and looking at himself in the snow. It certainly was cold, was his thought. When he returned to the United States, he would tell the folks what real cold was. His mind went from this to the thought of the old man of Sulphur Creek. He could see him quite clearly, warm and comfortable and smoking a pipe. "You were right, old fellow, you were right," he murmured to the old man of Sulphur Creek. Then the man dropped into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day ended in a long evening. There were no signs of a fire to be made. Never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the evening grew darker, its eager longing for the fire mastered it. With much lifting of its feet, it cried softly. Then it flattened its ears, expecting the man's curse. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog howled loudly, and still later it moved close to the man and caught the smell of death. This made the animal back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leapt and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and ran along the trail toward the camp it knew, where there were other food providers and fire providers.
Thank you very much, Janine, to conclude that story that brings the moment of death, which we'd all be facing at one time or other, very, very vividly to one's attention, and therefore the story has a profundity from that alone. Michael, in Germany, how did you find it? Are you familiar with this?
Not with the story at all.
How did you find it?
Very impressive.
Mm.
It reminds me of two things. One is the physical experience of extreme cold, which I have a horror of, an absolute horror. So the story in a way is horrific for me.
Yeah.
I've read one or two stories. There was a book by a German called Vorwärts Kameraden, wir müssen zurück, which you can hardly get these days, which is about someone who fought on the Eastern Front. And when the soldiers froze completely, the instructions were not to defrost them because the excruciating pain. And the fact they couldn't be cured, that it's better just to leave them to freeze to death.
Yeah.
The lighter side of it was that it reminded me, I don't know if anyone knows the writer in Spanish, I think Brazilian, Horacio Quiroga, who's quite well known, at least in Latin America, he's very well known. And he wrote a lot of stories. I prefer to Jack London personally because they have a sort of little bit lighter and more humor in them.
Yeah.
But there's one story about a man who's bitten by a snake, and it reminds me a little bit this sort of thing, that somehow I'm going to survive and what I'm going to do, and I'm going to ignore it. And it describes the slow effect of the snake bite. And he's been foolhardy in the same way. He hasn't heeded warnings, and he thought he's going to overcome this, and he dies in the same way. You know, he sort of gives up at the end and he dies from this snake bite. And it reminded me a little bit of that.
What you were saying about the Eastern Front, I remember someone speaking about that and saying that when people were about to die from cold, a warmth came over them, and they had that. Yeah, there was some kind of moment of satisfaction before they slept away, and that the story seemed to allude to that, didn't it? So it's obviously some kind of a physiological fact. So yeah, I like the way that he constructs a narrative with these details, very specific and believable. The way that the heat of the fire would have caused the snow to fall from the branches. That's just the sort of thing that would happen.
I think there's an overwhelming feeling that this is written from personal experience.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean that does
intense
come.
cold and was
Yeah.
very, very frightened and nearly
Yeah.
died. Yeah.
Obviously,
he didn't die because he wrote
Yeah,
it.
but
I have that feeling that he experienced a similar experience.
Yes, indeed. And the language is perfectly adapted to that purpose. I think it's almost transparent. One doesn't think of the language; one just thinks of the events,
Yes,
which
good
is
point. Absolutely good point.
a perfect thing. Michael, in London, how did you find it? You're mute. I'm sorry, you're mute. You can unmute.
Really disturbing. I mean, it was so graphically detailed. I mean, quite amazing to read it, but and as soon as he starts feeling warm, then you know that's it. That's and it does make it sound like it's actually ultimately a pleasant death.
Yes,
That's
yes,
part of it.
yes.
But
Perhaps it is much better than other ways
yeah,
of dying. Yeah.
yeah.
My experience of cold is so limited compared to this, but I have had the experience of going on when I was, a novice cyclist, setting out on my bike and thinking, oh, it's not too cold, not too. I don't need gloves. And then sort of 2 hours later, I just couldn't actually do anything with my hands. And I remember I was going to some meeting with someone about some work, and the friend I was going, he had to do my shirt up and put a tie on because I just couldn't do it. I mean, it was curious. I don't know. But, Janine, I mean, you live in quite a cold state, don't you? But you must get quite a lot
sometimes it's very hot, and other times it's very cold. But I agree with Mike. The thing that is, I'm wondering if the out-of-body experience is not what gives the feeling of warmth, because obviously, to me anyway, that's what happened. In other words, he had already died, but there are stages that the body goes through in the process of dying. And the fact that he talks about, coming around the bend with the boys, and he finds himself, and so he's already experiencing that initial leaving of your body. And I'm wondering if that's not where the feeling of warmth comes from, is that you're no longer there experiencing the cold,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you're already dead. You just don't know it yet.
I
And
think that is a very good point. This sense that one could perceive oneself in almost already having passed over and looking down. Uh, yeah, but being an
because people that
observer of
have
oneself.
near-death experiences talk
Mm,
about that,
mm.
of being able to be outside and recall, emergency personnel, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
tell you everything that happened, if
Mm,
they live, of course. If they don't, well, we don't know
mm,
about that. But the story itself, it was very interesting because you don't hear any dialogue except of what he's going to tell the old man at the creek, that he was right.
yeah.
And even that is not spoken aloud. It's an internal dialogue that he's going to tell this guy. So
Mm,
it's a very long passage where there's no interruption, and I think that's what gives it the drama, is that
mm,
it's relentless, and it almost seems like the rational mind, well, I've got to flap my arms and wiggle my hands, and you know it, the natural things that people would do, to no avail. And I like the way that London presents nature and the cold as not a villain necessarily, but a relentless reality that the man cannot get away from. He's,
mm.
no matter what he does, it's inevitable. And of course, I think on a higher level, when he says, "I push it to the back of my mind," right? And keep going, just keep going, just keep going. And at some point, you don't go anymore. And I think that's what gives it that relentless, even though it's very descriptive and it seems like it's taking forever to get to the point where he's going to die. But he does, as a writer, he does it very well.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's well placed. Carl, what was your reaction to it? You know the story, do you? I think.
Yes, I do.
Oh, so
The
yeah.
text is a little bit different from the one I have read.
Which is
There's a few
the first
differences.
version? Is it? Is it the first
I'm not
version?
talking about the first version. I'm talking about this version, the 1908, which is what we just read. But anyway, I'm not sure in this one how it ended. But in what I have here, it's where it has the dog at the end.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so the dog whined loudly, and later it crept close to the man and caught the scent of death. And then this made the animal bristle and back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and trotted up the trail in the direction of the camp it knew, where there were other food providers and fire providers. So I think that's close, but I'm not sure if it's exactly the same. But the interesting thing is the howling of the dog. And is that what happens typically? I mean, because the dog had a dog didn't really care about him, but except as a provider. So, but he had
Yeah.
loss though, a
Yeah.
sense of.
No. In our text later, the dog howled loudly.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that sounds very similar. I mean, if not, well, there might be slight variations, but I mean,
Yeah.
Jack London did identify with wolves, and I suppose that aspect of the ancestry of a dog somehow he saw it as being representative of some kind of pure instinct towards something, or yeah, a very sort of instinctual being, I think, and did.
I've
If the
I've never
man
read.
could, if the man couldn't talk, because I mean, if there had been somebody, what he says in the text that they couldn't have spoken, and his
Yeah,
mouth
yeah,
was all frozen, why wouldn't the dog's mouth be frozen too?
yeah. No, the dog seems to fare much better in the cold. Yeah, I don't know whether that's a physiological
Well,
difference.
there's a
I don't
line in the
know.
story about
Well,
that London uses about the dog having a natural, because the
And
dog has fur or the hide. I don't know what they call
mm,
dog fur.
yeah,
Fur.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's
so
yeah, yeah.
he's naturally, and
Mm,
London also tells us that the dog would not have traveled, that he would have dug him into and waited
Yeah.
till the cold passed. So the dog has instinct. The man doesn't. He has a rational brain. But the dog is going to survive because the dog knows how to keep warm. And that is you dig a hole and wrap your tail and bunker down.
Which is what huskies do, and I think that they seem to be
Yeah.
well adapted to that climate, don't they? They you know, they are used
And
to,
see, we don't have hair like that. We can't do that.
yeah.
So I can see that the dogs have fair or fur around their mouth.
But
And
the man
even though
did
the man
too.
had
The
a
man had a
beard,
beard.
right, but he didn't have the nose
Yeah,
hair. He didn't have the covering over his face, which kept I would imagine would keep the jaw working. That
maybe they have a different metabolism or something, dogs, that they just can't
Yeah.
deal with the cold better than we can, because we really, yeah, I mean, we certainly need a lot of assistance, don't we?
I think they must do, because wolves survive in extreme
Yeah.
cold,
Yeah,
don't they? So
exactly,
there must be a
exactly. The
reason.
Arctic, and yeah, exactly. Yeah, they
Because
do.
don't-
And they
don't-
don't live as long as we do, so that means maybe they have a higher metabolism. So that's
right.
you know,
But don't they have reindeer and moose and they
Yeah.
all live in extreme cold.
yeah, reindeer, absolutely, yes, indeed, yeah,
Eskimos have their dogs that live.
yeah. And the dogs don't wear clothes, do they? They go around.
They don't need to.
No, that's right.
Yeah. I
It's a
think
shame AJ's not here, because he's a rather
he
specialist
no,
on
yeah,
dogs, and
yeah.
that
It would be an
is
interesting evolutionary point if modern dogs, which are constantly being clad in a sissy way in winter by people, if generations later, through evolution, they lose their ability to withstand extreme cold.
yeah,
Just a
that
funny
is interesting.
evolutionary point,
Yeah,
might be.
that is interesting. Yeah, I don't know.
Carl, can I ask you how old were you when you first read this story?
I read it very recently.
Yeah.
Recently, okay.
Yes.
'Cause I'm wondering, because there's two, as you were explaining,
hmm
how a younger person would look on that as opposed to older people who have more acquaintance with people who have died. Um,
hmm
and I'm wondering if London, obviously the man was very intelligent, realizing that there is a separation of generations and how they look at death differently. I was curious as to when you first read it.
Yeah, no, I'd never read the other one either.
In the first version, my understanding is that the man survives.
I was going to
Oh,
ask about that.
Yeah,
Yeah, because so far we haven't seen
Oh.
any big difference.
so yeah, that kind of makes it more of a sort of like a Hollywood film type thing, where where someone
yeah.
always survives, or the man ends up
Happy end.
living.
Yeah,
The happy ending, and there's love
yeah.
influence, and
Yeah.
but yeah, so it's a more of a profound story with
Mm.
that, I think. Yeah.
Instead, are you too young? I hope this isn't too personal a question to remember the Great Cold of '62.
I was born in '62, and I
So
remember
you won't
my
have a
mother
memory of it. It was
telling me
unbelievable.
that
Oh
I was
my!
kind of wrapped up and
I
everything.
thought. I mean, that was such a horror. God Almighty!
Oh, you remember it, do you?
I
I mean,
remember it as complete horror. It's like a
How long did
trauma.
it last?
Well, it lasted the winter.
just
I mean,
one winter.
The whole
Yeah,
winter.
temps
it was
froze over, your hands dropped off. I was in screaming pain. It was horrible. There were a few other winters later like that, and then there weren't. There were a
yeah,
couple
but
of
nothing
winters
quite
into the
like it since.
60s.
Yeah,
62 was the big one, completely appalling. I
yeah,
can't even, it's just a nightmare.
yeah.
There was a fog as well, and everything froze, and your hands dropped off. Well, they didn't physically, obviously, drop off.
Yeah.
I still got them, but it felt as though they were going to drop off. And I think
Mm.
maybe it sort of started my horror of extreme cold. And there were a few more years. I think '64 was quite bad as well. There were a couple more. '62 was a really horrible one. Yeah.
That's interesting. Michael, I mean, in America, did you experience any particularly sort of severe
On the
conditions?
East Coast, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
it could get really very, very cold.
Mm.
Um, but I mean, I don't remember it being quite like the London Tale.
No,
Uh,
no, no.
and I was in Europe in '62, but I think that was only up until November.
Mm.
And then I went back to America, so I guess I missed it.
Mm,
Oh, okay. Mhm.
Yeah.
mm.
Well, we had an Arctic blast in 2014, and I remember because that's when I broke my leg on the ice. So yeah, I remember that. But the Arctic blast was so bad that they brought in bottled water because the ice was so cold that it wouldn't drip. I mean, it never, it
Mhm.
wouldn't thaw. And it was the weirdest thing that they said, well, we've got to get water to these people. And the whole, everything was just covered with ice and branches were breaking under the ice. I mean, it was really quite
Well, why didn't
extraordinary.
the bottled water freeze, though? How did they keep that from freezing?
I don't know. They trucked it in from Lexington.
And
Um, I don't know if they have some sort of warming things in trucks. I don't know how
yeah,
trucks work. So,
yeah.
but it was very odd, very odd.
I suppose that would have been a reason to maybe drink some alcohol, I think. Which is,
Unfortunately,
this
we're
one
not
for
Russians. We don't have homegrown
yeah,
vodka, to keep us warm. But um,
yeah, yeah. On the sub, yeah.
but I find that this story is really interesting to me. How he because I don't really know what to think about this guy. I mean, is he
What the
an
character in the
idiot,
story?
or is he a tourist, or is he
Oh, I mean,
well,
I'm assuming that he was one of the prospectors that was
one
there
of the
in the
49ers, the
Yukon.
gold
Yeah,
rush? Yeah,
indeed. And there were
yeah.
lots of people there that went with not much experience, hoping to get rich. I mean, yeah, not didn't have a very good experience. And I mean,
Who would the boys have been then? I mean,
Well, that's yeah.
yeah, I suppose his friends or yeah, I don't know. I mean, clearly the level of um of sort of science in relation to cold temperatures was such that lots of people got scurvy, including Jack London, as I said, and
Uh-huh.
a lasting effect. So, yeah, people weren't really aware of how to live in that environment very effectively,
Because he
which
did
is
say that
understandable.
somebody advised him to wear the
Something over the front, yeah, indeed,
yeah,
yeah.
and he didn't do it.
Hmm.
And
But I think losing fingers, other extremities, is not uncommon with extreme frostbite, and it is a really serious thing to guard against. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
easy to happen. I mean, particularly, I remember hearing that. I mean, if one was camping in those kind of places, it could be very dangerous going out if one's a man going out, waking up, going out for a pee. And yeah, that would be the last time one would kind of had the normal use of that member. So that, something.
and just moccasins on his feet.
Yeah,
That,
I thought about that. Yeah, well, what exactly? Very thick moccasins are. I
yeah,
mean, yeah,
I
that
would
was.
it would have to be, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, goodness. I mean, I suppose they were, yeah, sort of heavy duty boot type things
yeah.
but yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we're all in rooms here that are heated, so that's yeah, we can enjoy that, I suppose, in that sense. It gives us a reason to be thankful.
The story
Yeah.
has made me want to read more of his stories that deal with animals, which I haven't done really.
Oh,
I
okay.
read the,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
because I think he has a really good, a really good insight into them.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I found
Yeah, I
that
mean,
part of the
dogs
movie.
certainly. I don't know that he wrote about cats or other animals, but
Dogs,
or birds. I don't know that he was a bird uh, aficionado.
it's more
I don't
dogs,
know.
but he does stress, doesn't he, also importance of instinct and
Yeah,
how
that, I mean,
the
that
dog
is the main
without the
thing.
intelligence is in another sense more intelligent because it's going to
Yeah,
survive
yeah,
because it does the
yeah,
right thing through instinct.
yeah.
That's very true, I think.
Yes, I mean, I think that something similar is the case with human beings. Sometimes people that
Absolutely.
have got a
Yeah,
low
yes.
intelligence
Yes.
act on instinct, do
Yes.
not go down intellectual blind alleys
Yes.
because
Right.
they kind of can't conceive abstract things, and therefore they just. I mean, my lodger was like that in that he just wouldn't be able to grasp things that he could be deceived by. So it was like a dog. A dog won't kind of have wrong ideas of society or political ideology because it just won't. Yeah. There's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot to be. Yeah. So
Yeah, but instinct is important, and I think sometimes we become over rational, over intellectualized, and
Yeah,
devalue the
yeah.
importance of instinct. And instinct can very often
Yeah,
tell
I
us,
agree.
the
I
right
agree.
or the wrong thing to do, even if we can't explain it. We just say, no, there's something wrong. I shouldn't do this, and
Yeah,
Which
that's
is,
very important.
I agree. I mean, sorry, sorry, Janine, you speak.
well, I was just going to say, he knew enough to kill the dog and put his hands into the warmth of the dog to get the fingers back to feeling. But why didn't he bring the dog and use the dog's body warmth? Because I know Eskimos sleep with their dogs,
Mm.
and the
Yeah,
exchange of body warmth.
I thought at that
I don't.
point that he'd lost it. I thought that seemed to me a bad idea, and that indicated that he kind of mentally he just lost his grasp of
Closing
things. The
down.
idea of killing the dog, it just seemed a bad idea. And unless I misunderstood, he seemed to have used up all his matches. They
Yeah.
all
Right.
so he wouldn't really, he wouldn't have been able to get his hands warm to start another fire because that was it. All the matches were gone and he couldn't really rub wood together. That would be too
But
difficult.
at the end, the dog goes near him, obviously to keep warm. You know what I mean? The dog didn't go to kill him. The dog went closer to him and closer to him. And you think, well, okay, he's going to snuggle up, and try
Well,
to,
the
get
dog
warm.
was assuming that the man would
And
be
then
able to
he's
get to a
dead,
fire
and
or
the dog
something and
backs
give some
off.
food. Yeah.
Because there's no body warmth coming out of this provider.
Yeah. The dog goes elsewhere.
It's a very interesting story.
Good.
Yes,
That's good.
yes,
I
it
mean,
is.
yeah, it
Good.
sets
Yeah,
up
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Yeah.
Oh, well, on that positive note, I think maybe we can wish everyone a good
Very good.
Christmas,
yeah, a
Yule.
good evening of
Keep
solstice, a good
reasonably
Christmas.
warm.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks so much everyone for turning up. Good to see you, Michael, Janine, Carl, Michael as well.
Thank you.
And
Good to see you all.
yeah, see you next time, I hope, when we'll be
We'll be hearing
Next
about
year.
FR Leavis at the end of the month. So I haven't got a precise day, but it'll be the last weekend
Okay.
in January, probably. I'll
Okay,
send-
well
obviously
that'll
send
be
out.
slightly different, won't it?
That'll be very
Very
different.
good. Very good.
All right then. Yeah. Bye everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a